Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
And Tane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Good to everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. Hopefully you've enjoyed our last few episodes. And before we invite our guest on, Tane, what have you learned in the last week?
Yeah, I guess something that I've taken away in the last week is just how much sport can grow. I went away the last weekend with our Otago under 18 girls, and so that was a good opportunity to, I guess, showcase what they have to offer, but also to see both ends of the spectrum in terms of, I guess, what is happening in our space and what's happening in the rugby space. So still a lot of potential to grow, but something that I'm hoping I can have some impact on. And I guess with that, being on the Otago Rugby League board, hoping to have some influence in terms of where we direct that space. As many people are aware that space is continuing to grow, and so it's just making sure that we have the right people in place to help nurture that and foster that in the way that it should go. Because I think a lot of the times, growth is great, but you've got to have the right people in the right places to actually make it sustainable. So very exciting for that next challenge, and then we'll just go from there.
Fantastic. That's great. Growth happens, but also growth needs to happen for a reason. And I think that links up to what I learned this week. We ran a summit last week, which is really awesome. We had about 100 people around the country jumping on, and the range of people that jumped on was from people that were experts in their field to beginners. And we had to just direct the summit towards everyone's the same. So starting from basics, which was quite hard quite challenging when you have the whole different levels of people, but it was great to run. But enough about us. As you know, those of you that listen to us often, Tanya and myself can keep babbling on and on and on, but we're not going to do that there. As always, we scour the country, we scour the world to find people that we think we're amazing. And like we always say, we think everyone's amazing. Everyone's got a story to tell, but we can't have everyone on the podcast. But today, we're very lucky, very honored, and very privileged to have someone that I think is a fantastic human being. They might not know this, but I shared this with them just before. I've been following the work for a long time, and I've had the joys of working with some of his colleagues through my other mahi that I do, and we're very lucky, very privileged to have Jamie jumping into our podcast. Welcome to our podcast, Jamie.
I'm pumped to be here. An amazing podcast, very inspiring for young people.
Fantastic, Jamie. So I guess to start off, Jamie, if we just go through your education, you Harvard, Stanford, you have Oxford, you have Tsinghua, you have University of Pennsylvania, Yale, and that's what you have at the moment. But it all started with you in Auckland at King's College. What is the inspiration for you to go, hey, this is something I want to go? Because, as we said just before we started the podcast, that a lot of people in New Zealand don't look at those as aspirational. That's too hard, too far. What is it for you that said, hey, I'm going to just apply and see what happens?
So growing up, my mother was always really focused on education, and she did an MBA degree, a law degree, a commerce degree from University of Auckland back when education was free. And growing up, she really emphasized for me that education is really the most powerful way you can advance yourself on the world stage and have more impact. So initially, what that looked like for me is aiming for something like maybe medicine at the University of Auckland. When I was 13, I was on a train from GI out to King's in Otahu, and I sat next to a boy called Ben Kornfeld, and he'd gotten into Yale University. He was an American guy, and he sat next to me and said, Jamie, you love academics. You should really think about applying as well. From that conversation, I was really inspired to think, actually, could I potentially get out there on the world stage? What does this look like? I read some books like What They Teach You at Harvard Business School, and I had the fortune to visit Columbia with my mum when I was about 15, see the campus in person in New York. And this really inspired me to go hard on my academics and aim for these top universities. So by the end of high school, I applied to a wide range of US and UK schools. I wasn't sure what I could get into. So I applied for schools like Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Columbia, Wharton, Duke, kind of all these strong schools, and let it rip. And then fortunately got into them. And then I chose to go to Harvard, which began this whole mind-blowing journey for the last 10 years.
That's true. I love that, because two things that stand out for me there is, number one, the comment that your mum said. It reminds me of, I went to a talk with John Key a few years ago, and he said the same thing. He said they can take everything from you in your life, but they cannot take away your education. I think that resonates with what your mum said to you. And the second thing is just a chance conversation where somebody saw the potential and just said, "Hey, Jamie, give it a crack," which is really, really beautiful. And I think this is awesome because a lot of us have these chance conversations, but we don't think too much about it. But thinking about you as a young person at year 13, what is the reaction from your peers and I guess your school when you're like, "Hey, I'm applying for these overseas universities," which which would be a bit different for that time 10 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I should say first and foremost, my school was very supportive. And, I was trying to do all these funky things most students didn't. I took 10 A levels and most students took 3 or 4. I created 5 different clubs. I was very pushy with trying to find new opportunities to challenge myself. And I think for the most part, to the credit of many of the teachers at my school, I think about folks like Mr. Coombe, or Mr. Fenner, the headmaster of the time. They were very supportive. Mr. Watts, my old Greenbank head housemaster, and they really egged me on and encouraged me at every step. At certain points, I had to get through some sort of like logistical, bureaucratic, rules and barriers to be able to go and do all these different activities. But for the most part, they were very supportive. And I think even though it was an unusual path, there were enough kids that were interested, and there was a bit of a track record. There was a guy called Jim Frood, who was the president of the Scholars Com, or rather, and the Overseas Guidance Counselor. And these guys were passionate about helping me that I was able to go into the process feeling I had enough support behind me. And my mum was very, very excited for me to give it a shot. And yeah, let it rip. So I would say they weren't necessarily the first to breach the idea to me, but they created a really supportive environment for me to run in, which is, all I can ask for.
That's really beautiful because nothing happens without support, and it's beautiful that your school and those people that you mentioned had the support for you to go give yourself a go. Because a lot of times I work in spaces where young people have an idea and they're quickly squashed by a teacher or somebody. Hey, for example, hey, I want to go overseas, I want to see it, but the teacher goes, hey, you put XYZ category and it's not going to happen for you. So it's really awesome that you have that. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it does happen for some people. And you need one person to say that to you, and that's going to change your whole trajectory in life. So Jamie, you leave Auckland, you end up at Harvard. What is it like for you coming from little old New Zealand to a place where you have all these amazing high profile academics like yourself in one space?
I would say mind-blowing is the first words that come to mind. To give you some context for this, in my entire life in New Zealand, I think one of the beautiful things about our country is we're a very egalitarian country. We're quite humble and down to earth. And that has a lot of good traits. But also, you don't hear sort of kids in high school sharing wild ambitions or what they want to do typically, because they might get a bit teased, or, it might not be so cool, right? And my first week at Harvard, I met 4 different American kids who told me they wanted to become the US president. And if you think about this for a second, it's kind of mind-blowing, right? In my whole life to date, I'd never heard anyone in New Zealand say they wanted to go into government or something, like my high school friends, etc. It would be considered a bit odd to say that. But in the first week, these guys let it rip. Now, maybe some of those guys are a little bit too far, but I think it captures the essence of raw ambition, which Harvard definitely has in spades. And it's the kind of culture where you feel like, okay, now anything on the world stage is possible. You just need to choose what you want to do and run at it. But no one's going to say, hey, that ambition's not possible, because there's, presidents like Obama and, George Bush, and, incredible Nobel Prize winning laureates, amazing entrepreneurs like, for example, Zuckerberg. And this gives you a sense of possibility, which is very infectious. The second thing I would say about the environment is your classmates in this environment are very inspiring. For the most part, they were all the top students of their cities or countries coming together. And there's a certain level of fascination existing in the class. And you can learn a ton from your classmates in everything from, roommate discussions to classes. I just got back from Salt Lake City, Utah, where I caught up with all my roommates from college who I spent many of the years with. And, one of them is in psychology, one of them is in history, one's actually advocating for American Indian rights as a lawyer out of Montana right now. One of them is actually a teacher in Germany. She got a Harvard degree and then went into teaching. Another, for example, is working in private equity at one of the world's biggest investment funds, a real diversity of backgrounds. And I love that, because you've got everything from sort of the altruistic teacher to like the Wall Street tycoon, to, in my case, the entrepreneur. And, it makes for sort of this feeling of possibility, which I think everyone can benefit from.
That's really beautiful. What I loved about that, Jamie, was the fact you spoke about the diversity of thought patterns. People think when you go to XYZ university, you're going to be XYZ, but actually, hey, as you've just mentioned, you've got a whole range of peers that are doing a whole range of different things, which is really quite awesome. And I guess With you, you said you thought you'd be a doctor. That's what you as a 13-year-old, but a whole different pathway opened up for you. When did you realize that actually I want to go down doing the mathematics pathway? Again, I asked this question because, we have lots of people that enjoy the sciences at school, and immediately people say, hey, you should be a doctor or an engineer just because you like these things. And I'm not that mindset because I think that's really narrow. But what is it like for you to go, hey, this is what I enjoy. I'm going to go down the mathematics pathway.
So this is a good example of New Zealand on the world stage and where kind of gaps can arise, right? So in New Zealand, it was very wacky to do computer science in high school. It was considered a very niche subject, quite an easy subject for some because the content wasn't so rigorous. And no one really would, not a single guidance counselor ever recommended that I think about computer science one time period. It was biology, chemistry, physics. That's what you should do. If you're quite academic, go for that. The other thing is, you don't know about fields like entrepreneurship or biotechnology or AI or like none of these things are possibilities, right? So, or at least at the time. And so for me, medicine seemed like the closest use to my skills that was sort of a solid job to go down. But it wasn't until I was 16 and I self-studied A-level economics. I took that for the first time and I was captivated by it because it provided the most overarching theory for why the world is the way it is, from why people vote the way they do to why people, why cities emerge, why people choose to live in cities, how these products randomly materialize, and how the world seems to conveniently have a lot of the things we want. And the capitalism, the free market, economics provided this overarching theory. Now, for a long time, I was like, I'm doing math, but what can I do with math? Like, I don't want to become a math professor. I don't really want to become an engineer. So what can I do with this? And for the first time, I was like, wow, I can combine economics, math, maybe finance. I could work on Wall Street as an investor. I could, do something in that space. So that became sort of the North Star goal. And as I read more about what kids did from Harvard, a lot of them do go into finance and investing and use those mathematical skills in quite an applied way. And so that took me on this path from, initially medicine towards applied math, economics, investing, finance, which was a lot more, my passion. I just didn't know that it even existed as a field that I could consider.
Isn't that crazy? You don't know what you don't know, and as you said right at the start of your answer there, in New Zealand, and I guess in most countries in the world, if you enjoy sciences, you become a doctor and engineer because that's all we know. And it's really quite funny because I did a computer science degree, and at school, as you said, computer science was for easy people. If you want to have some free time, you go to the computer science room and play with some Excel or something like that. This wasn't hard. Then you go to university, it's a whole different ball game altogether. So it's really awesome to hear how that happened. And I guess as you started your Harvard education, when did the idea of Crimson come into your mind?
So the interesting thing is, okay, so my school overall incredible, loved it, and it was an amazing environment. But a lot of the time, people giving advice that sounds plausible but is actually incorrect is very dangerous, right? And so what I experienced going through at least my high school was a lot of people giving me their opinions about what I needed to do to get into these overseas schools, but a lot of the information was super wrong. So for example, people told me, you don't need to do all these extra subjects, it won't help you. Or why are you doing these different clubs? It's not necessary. Or, you can chill out, don't do so many competitions. It turns out actually a lot of what I did was very useful to getting into these schools. And people hadn't done a lot of these things before, like all the extra subjects that I took, but it actually was a really big admissions advantage. So ultimately, when I got into every school that I applied for at the high end, I realized when a lot of my classmates that applied got rejected from almost all the schools, I had smart friends from other schools like McLean's that had applied to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford. None of them had taken them. That there was actually a big opportunity to actually correct this gap where Kiwis may have the raw ability, but they don't have the strategy or the knowledge or the admissions expertise to be able to actually take them from, their raw potential and then get them into these top universities. There was a gap missing. And so I saw an opportunity to launch something using my personal experience and really be that extra level between the school and the university, that career guidance, university counselor type figure, and also a bit of an academic strategist, academic coach. The other thing that I saw a need for was, in New Zealand, there's a real culture of elite performance around sports, around rugby, around cricket. But in academics, not really so much conventionally. And to get into these schools, you kind of have to run a race that is almost, competitive as an athlete would in terms of preparing for these exams, competing at the highest level, being very consistent, having that mental, psychological game as well. So I launched Crimson to really take some of the skills that I had developed and bring them to more students with initially kids in Auckland and then really nationwide. But that was really how the experience was first conceived. It was my personal lived experience, seeing the gap and seeing an opportunity to solve things. And when I first launched Crimson, I launched it really as a social project to help, kids that didn't have this knowledge get support. I wasn't sure if I would do this really as like a charity or as a business, but I just wanted to get out there and start helping some students. So that was really the first conception of Crimson.
No, beautiful, and I love that it started with filling the gap idea. And I think most great ideas start with filling the gap. We see a gap, we fill the gap. But lots of people see a gap, but they do nothing about it. Before we talk about that pathway, why the name Crimson? What inspired that name? Because that's a pretty cool name.
Yeah, thank you. So, my old high school Kings, the color is maroon, which is fairly close to crimson, and Harvard's university color is also crimson as well. And so I felt, an interesting almost sense of fate between this high school that I'd been so deeply inspired by, and then of course the university I was heading off to. At the same time, in many ways, crimson's a color that reflects boldness, ambition, courage, a bit of energy and excitement to it. And for many of my crimson students, they're taking a bold risk. They're leaving their nest, their community, they're going to the other side of the world, sort of unknown opportunity and possibility, and they're taking the path less traveled. And so it's a bold color that really speaks to that ambition as well. So there are a couple of things that came together, and I loved my English literature back in the day, and I thought this kind of nicely hits the mark. So Crimson was the name.
It totally does. It also rolls off the tongue really easily. Crimson education. It's really, really, really cool. And what are some of the challenges you face? Because here you are coming with this amazing idea to New Zealand, where we have this problem with the tall poppy syndrome. What is it like for you bringing it in, and what are the challenges you face when you said, "Hey guys, this is a reality for some of you"?
So a variety of responses. The first is, why do we need this? Everyone should just stay locally. The universities locally are good. What's the point? Second one is, what qualifications do you have as an 18-year-old kid with braces to tell me, and my students what they should be doing? You're not a teacher, you're not a principal, you're not a guidance counselor. Like, what are you? The third one is, well, where's your track record? Have you helped anybody? And I guess finally, you're still a student. What do you possibly know? So that's some of the probably opening critiques to start with 4.
Yes.
I guess the good thing is, I tend to have a thick skin, and my mum has a lot of grit, and I was inspired by her own entrepreneurial journey growing up. And so I really wasn't fazed by sort of rejection too much. And I sort of view this almost as an inevitability, because I'd personally seen this massive gap where I had gone an untraditional path, gotten into all the schools. And so every time one of these teachers or a stakeholder would, through the kindness of their heart, but still say, no, we don't need this is wrong, whatever, I realized this is just a short temporary distortion before we're able to build this, platform that will ultimately correct this misunderstanding. And so I felt like it was a matter of time, and I had to just get to the students. And ultimately, what I chose to do at the beginning was actually ignore the schools, ignore counselors, and focus directly on students, because they were the ones experiencing the problem, and parents could articulate this as well. And I didn't have to go through all the bureaucracy and get permissions. I just go straight to students who are a couple of years below me, and they'd be my advocates. And that's really what happened. I began building this advocacy base of students at strong schools around Auckland. And then our brand would spill up to the teachers, spill up to the principals, spill up to the counselors, because we helped their children get into these top schools. But I certainly went to them first, because they were the ones most affected by our services and the opportunity ahead of them.
And that's so true. In anything that we do in life, it's the people that get affected the most that you need to go to. Whether it's selling a product, selling a service, or talking about a service. If you go to the middleman is going to block you because they don't understand it. So it's really beautiful that you did that there. And this is something that I face as well. Because in lots of schools, you have gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers, rightly or wrongly, they are trying to protect the young people, but sometimes that protection leads to lots of opportunities. So it's really awesome you did that there. And as you started growing Crimson, and you start filtering the rest of the country, how did you feel as a young entrepreneur? This is you as 18-year-olds. When did you go, actually, this is now scaling up. I need to think about this from a social good to actually, hey, this now is becoming a business opportunity.
So I guess I had this instinct early on that it was really cool to get a small number of students into these top universities. But what I really love is scale of impact. And so for me, the way I thought about this is, the kids who are in most need of this, ironically, aren't in Auckland at the strongest schools. Actually, it's nationwide. It's in more rural places. It's in parts of the country that I probably haven't spent as much time in. And so there was a natural instinct as a Kiwi, get this nationwide, get this to more schools. We partnered with Rangiruru, as we were talking about before the podcast began, a school in Christchurch. to make sure that, you know, Rangi girls down there could get access to our kind of support. And we had a really innovative headmaster there, Sandra Hasty, who actually spearheaded this initiative with me. And she was my old deputy headmaster at St. Kitts Prep and was actually cheering me on from when I was 12. So I guess that was my instinct: go fast nationally, quickly get that support, make sure you impact more Kiwis. And then very quickly I realized actually this could go to more countries, because New Zealand is a very diverse place. We've got students from, you know, the Maori community, the Chinese community, Korean, Indian, Japanese, American, European, everybody's around. And so we were getting all these students from different parts, different cultures, different parts of society in New Zealand. And it was resonating with a whole variety of students. And so I thought, you know, for example, if we can impact Chinese students here or Indian students here, is there an opportunity to support these kids, you know, for example, in China or in India? And actually, could this be much bigger than just a New Zealand company? So that was really how my, you know, mind started ticking over to think about actually a global opportunity for Crimson.
And it's so beautiful because, again, it's the people in your network, you know, it's the people that you know, the people that cheer you on, where these opportunities come from. You know, the Sandra from Rangiruru, who you knew from a long time ago, cheering you on. So you go to those people there, which is really beautiful. And as you start scaling up, it makes sense, you know, if it's helping people here, why can't it help people around the world, which is really beautiful. But I'm going to shift focus a little bit and talk about you. So here you are setting this business up and doing amazing stuff. But on the other hand, personally, you're also studying. What is the drive for you? And I'm going to refer back to a comment that popped up on social media a few months ago, the Thanos of LinkedIn. You know, what is that? How did that make you feel with all those academic qualifications that you have? What is your drive to keep studying?
So my general philosophy is, you know, you're either growing or you're dying, and I view this in every area of my life, in terms of business, learning, etc. Now, for me, growth, of course, there's growth in many dimensions, but when it comes to learning, you know, I think you can learn through like peer interactions, you can learn through, you know, working, you can learn through listening to, you know, great folks. I had a really interesting meeting with a Kiwi earlier today, which was, you know, he was mind-boggling, very interesting guy working in the field of AI. Those things are all great, but I think the good thing about formal education, tertiary, university, etc., is you get the world expert or one of the world experts in a given field. They can teach a small class, and it isn't a 45-minute soundbite. It's a rigorous semester long. There's tests, there's exams, there's homework. It forces you to really engage with the content. Now, you could, of course, read a quick book or something, but there's a certain level of rigorous training required to master certain skills. The other thing about university is that, you know, I'm really busy with Crimson, and I like to be learning on autopilot. What I mean by that is basically, if I'm in a university program, the assignment's due, I've got to do it, I'm learning. But if I have to just sort of learn whenever I'm flexible, you know, people can get lazy. You know, maybe I get distracted, whatever. Maybe I don't do the work. So I enjoy, in the same way you might have a personal trainer for the gym, the structure of these university programs to keep my learning going. I also have chosen different pathways. Some have been part-time, like my recent program in military studies. Others have been full-time, like Yale Law School. But it's been fascinating. So that's, I guess, the overarching driver. I've also just been fascinated by many different fields. And the other thing is, of course, you know, it's useful for my Crimson students, because Crimson students can come to Crimson, and between myself, my co-founder, our team, you know, we've been to many of the top schools they aspire to go to. And so we can speak from sort of firsthand experience what it's like. And they don't have to sort of guess about what this reality is like. We can make it very concrete for them. And the more concrete it is, the more they think it's achievable, realistic, and the more inspired they're going to be. And that will help them be more successful. So there's both a personal learning curiosity and then a mission of Crimson a driver for me. And I certainly plan to keep studying. But I've had definitely a fun rodeo in the last 10 years.
It's really beautiful. Again, I use the word beautiful because everything here is just resonating. You know, as you said, there's two aspects in life. You can either stay still or you can grow. And I think a lot of there's a very traditional way of thinking that once you get your degree, you know, your undergrad, your postgrad, then study stops. You know, it's a very traditional way of thinking. But I think, you know, it's everyone that's succeeded really well has kept on studying. They've done something that's totally random, totally different. And as you said before, you know, the multifaceted way of learning, you know, when you're 13 versus when you're 29, you have different interests. So it's great to go down the pathway there. But also the fact that you walk the talk, you know, as you said before, you know, if you tell somebody, hey, this is what Stanford was like, but you've never been there, who's going to listen to you? But you're actually doing that there. And again, how did you feel when you had that crazy social media explosion when somebody referred to you as the Thanos of LinkedIn? How did you feel about that, waking up one morning and go, whoa, this is a crazy explosion?
Quite funny, because I love Marvel movies. In fact, I love Marvel so much that I recently watched Deadpool vs. Wolverine not once, but twice,
Oh, wow.
because it was so good. So, I mean, yeah, Thanos, funny one. I mean, sadly, he's not he wasn't the nicest guy in the Marvel universe, but certainly I think it's funny all the same. So yeah, I thought it was pretty hilarious. And you know, if my story, even though it's a bit extreme, inspires more folks to consider more studies, you know, puts learning on the agenda, the discussion board, I like it. So you know, I thought it was great, quite hilarious. And you know, it's also good fun for people to, you know, poke you a little bit. You know, good to make sure you're not feeling too serious. So I enjoyed reading some of the more troll comments my team showed me when I made a bit of a response video for our social media, which was good fun. But yeah, certainly entertaining, and I'm glad to make some people chuckle when it comes to learning.
You know, and I love your response. It's really quite funny. This was very cleverly done. So well done to you and your team for doing that there. But again, you know, there's always going to be haters out there. No matter what you do, there's always going to be haters. And you know, if you stop doing things because people hate on you, you're not going to go anywhere. And you know, I think that's the learning in life, that you know things get challenging. Not everyone's going to support you along the way. But as you said right at the start, you don't knock on those doors. That you find other doors to go down, which is really beautiful. Now, as you've, I guess one of the biggest questions for you as you're working through this, the finances for going to study in the States, you know, so for someone in New Zealand, how do you navigate that conversation? And I know over the last few years, you've been fantastic with Crimson, giving some fantastic scholarships, but I guess at the starting phase when you were still building up, how did you navigate that? Because that is a big barrier for a lot of people.
Sure. So the good thing about the US is more than any other country, it's got amazing financial aid and scholarships. And the higher rank the school, the more aid exists. So take a school like Harvard. At Harvard, 2/3 of students are on financial aid. Of the students on financial aid, 1/3 pay nothing to go there. So for our young students, for example, Sam Taylor, you know, a young boy from Mount Maunganui, this student is paying less than the cost of the University of Auckland to go to Harvard. Or take a boy like Cohen Hamana from Rotorua, free to go to Harvard, including flights. So these are examples of, you know, the power of these scholarships, where there's this perception from TV shows like Gossip Girl or something. These schools are so expensive, you know, you get in, but still you can't even go. But actually, the strongest schools have got deep financial aid because they want to get the world's best talent from any corner of the world, including New Zealand. And what this means, your primary focus as a student needs to be to get good enough to get in. And if you get in, you know, then a lot of the scholarships will be there. There's also a lot of funding available for athletic scholarships. There's merit-based scholarships. There's also the Robertson Scholarship, you know, funded by the late Julian Robertson, who's a big Crimson investor. And that scholarship sent many young Kiwis to Duke University, typically 2 to 3 per year for the last probably, 20 years. So there are all different ways we help our students navigate the process to getting into these top US and UK schools. The US is the best for scholarships. So normally when a student comes to us and they need a lot of scholarship support, we direct them towards the US. The UK, there's certain scholarships like the Myers and the Girdlers, but there isn't as many as the US pathway. So generally my advice is build a super strong profile, apply to a wide range of US schools. There's also certain universities like, you know, New York University, Abu Dhabi, which, you know, is fully funded. So one of our early students, Thomas Yates, for example, he went over to NYU, Abu Dhabi on a great scholarship. Or one of our students, Alex Tai, he got into Yale in US, or the National University of Singapore, Yale conjoint program. And that was also fully funded too, I think, or very close to it. So they're all examples of different ways we make it work. But a key thing is we just have a super strong encyclopedic knowledge within Crimson's, you know, massive team of counselors of all the world's scholarships at these top schools, so we can help a Kiwi quickly navigate what makes sense for them, and, you know, make sure their game plan's realistic, but also going to get them to their dream university.
You know what's good about that, Jamie, is the fact that there's this perception out there that going to the States is out of your reach, or the UK out of your reach. But you know, you don't know what you don't know, and the fact that you said, you know, straight away you put in those blinkers. High cost, low barrier, I'm not coming in. But if you go, wait a minute, if you do the work, you've got the grades, you've got all the clubs and everything, you know, there are opportunities for you to get in, which is really beautiful. So you've got the Crimson Education, and do you want to talk us through Crimson Global Academy? Because that's another branch that's started up, which was interesting because I meet lots of young people that are in mainstream school, but also are learning with Crimson Global Academy, and they tell me some interesting experiences, which is really cool.
I love that. Great to hear it. I mean, we've got an amazing student body. So one friction that my students often encountered in the first several years of Crimson is that, you know, you've got a strong student and they want to take certain subjects. Maybe the school doesn't offer them, or maybe the school does, but the student's too young. And the school says, no, you've got to wait. And the school's got good reasons for this on their end, right? They kind of, you know, every kid choosing any class they want, they kind of like chaos where like any kid's doing whatever, there needs to be some structure. The problem is structure is bad for individuals because they kind of this personalized learning experience. So we launched Crimson Global Academy to make sure students could learn at their own speed, of their potential and their ability rather than their age. So we've got a lot of kids, for example, who are 12, 13, completing the kind of academic coursework you might do when you're 17 or 18. We've got kids at schools that don't really teach computer science well, taking computer science and machine learning with us. We've got kids doing research papers through our extended project qualification, unit that high schools don't offer. And also through CGA, you can take Cambridge A levels from any part of New Zealand. You can also do the American APs and get a full US diploma from anywhere as well. And all this means more choice, more flexibility, geographic barriers are eliminated. And also the teachers you could have teaching you are some of the world's best from the global stage, rather than just those who live close to your physical school. All of this means that there's high quality education access for more Kiwis, which is great. And it's been a big driver of our pretty rapid growth. We're now approaching nearly 2,000 students across the global school, with about 450 full-time and the rest being part-time.
Wow, that's really, really, really fantastic. And I guess the question that comes to my mind straight away is how do mainstream schools react to this? They have a traditional set, and then here comes Jamie with something that's disruptive. How did that go? And I guess how does it go for the young people that are navigating both, say, mainstream school and also doing part-time Crimson?
Okay, so good question. By the way, if my puppies are yapping, let me know and I'll run and move them. But okay, so for the most part, schools have been supportive, which is great. So for the most part, schools are really excited. They see the gap, right? They see actually, NCA's got its limitations. Some flexibility for my students to take A levels is great. Take one of our students, Anna Hutchins. She was at an NCA school and she took 3 extra A levels with us, biology, chemistry, and math, I believe. She then got into Cambridge or Oxford for medicine. Pretty amazing. Or take a student like, for example, Jade Skis. She was at a local Kerikeri high school, and then she took 4 extra A levels, and then she got into, she moved full time, then she got into Princeton University for computer science. So in general, the schools are very supportive. There's the odd private school, right? That's a bit sad they're losing students to us, which, I can respect some good competition. But for the most part, we can collaborate with these guys. And I think, we've been really welcomed into the schooling environment, and we love to kind of add to the mosaic of choice students have.
I love that because, it's about opportunities. It's just about opportunities that that you're offering young people, and it's a choice that they have. Life is about choices. If you give, people can choose, they can come, they cannot come. It's just, again, comes down to when people are not supportive, which is great to hear that schools are really supportive. And I just seen recently that you're hoping to also start a charter school. Is that, what are your thoughts around that there?
So I've had the fortune of being on this Tiger Foundation board in New York City, which is the philanthropic arm of Tiger, the hedge fund that I used to work at, which has become a major investor in Crimson. Now, one of the things that we focus on is actually giving grants to New York City-based charter schools that are trying to level up education outcomes. To give you a sense, there are certain charter schools in our portfolio, like, Zeta schools, and some of the campuses of these charter schools make New Zealand's fanciest private schools look pretty rough. So the charter schooling model in America is bringing in a combination of amazing philanthropic backers, quality education entrepreneurs, top educators to create real options in the schooling landscape. In my opinion, in a place like New Zealand right now, where we actually have a true education crisis in many fronts, and that there's massive truancy in schools, there's huge teacher shortages, and you have serious issues for many kids across the country. Even at the best schools in the country, there are gaps, but I'm talking about the average school or even a struggling rural school. I think it's a no-brainer that you need to experiment. And so what charter schooling does is it basically says, hey, if you build a good schooling model and students want to go to it, the government will fund that, which means that actually any Kiwi can actually access the quality education, not just those that can afford to pay for private schooling. That opens up, the environment for impact for the whole nation, rather than just a small cross-section of New Zealand society. That's very exciting. And then you let the entrepreneurs innovate, the government can fund that, and everyone kind of wins. And if a public school doesn't like that, they can improve and they can get better and they can retain their students. And it's sort of good competition for everyone. I think what's bad is a system where you've got kind of poor results and then you have no choice. And a lot of the time parents can't move because they might have their rent in a certain home and they can't easily switch their jobs tied to it, which means that the child's fate is attached to the certain public school they happen to be born into. That's risky, I think, for New Zealand. So at a macro level, I think charter schooling isn't always necessary. But in a situation like New Zealand right now, it's really exciting because it actually, in my case, provides a genuine option for us to take all our learnings from the world stage, from tens of thousands of the world's best students, all these amazing teachers, and channel it to Kiwis nationwide. That's pretty cool. The other thing I'd say is just in a Crimson context, we've always wanted to find a way to collaborate more deeply with Kiwis from across the spectrum. Of course, we tend to focus on the shiny tip of the spear of ambitious Kiwis that want to go on the world stage and go to the world's best universities. But actually, I'm even more interested in helping the Kiwi who's become disengaged in school, who hasn't found a teacher that resonates with them, who doesn't really have a clear path to going to university yet. And hopefully we can help them on that journey. So that actually brings to life the charter school opportunity. And I'm very excited about it. I actually spent 4 years at Oxford doing my PhD on online schooling, charter schooling models and everything. And so it's been an area of passion for me for probably 7 years now. And I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to jump in and make some impact.
That passion comes through so clearly, Jamie, especially when you mentioned about, we speak about the shiny tip, which is, which will excel wherever they go, but it's that middle range where, if life tips it a certain way, their life will change quite dramatically. And if we try and do that in a positive direction, it's really beautiful. And again, it's really interesting, Jamie, because in the space that I work in, I see the same thing. You have the high achievers, which are amazing, and they're the ones that seek all the support. And I'm like, all right, cool, this is amazing. But the ones that actually need support or help are the ones that don't reach out. And how do you reach out to them? How do you get them to get engaged in education? And education is actually amazing, as opposed to going to school is a drag, which is it could be a generational thing. It could be the people you hang around with, but it's really beautiful to see that that's really got you ignited. Tana, you've got a question.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously you've talked about quite a lot. It's been quite inspiring and inspirational to hear, the passion that's coming through, particularly with Crimson. I guess how does Jamie find time for Jamie amongst all this, incredible stuff that you're achieving out there day to day? How do you find time to just be Jamie?
It's a great question. I would say actually, over the years, I've become better at getting a stronger sense of like how much Jamie time, I need, right? Alongside my love of Crimson. And by the way, because Crimson is this entrepreneurial thing I've been doing for 10 years, which really represents many of my strongest internal beliefs, in many ways, it's really electrifying to do every day because it doesn't feel like work, and it never really has. It's always felt like this mission, this exciting global journey. So I would say I have a lot of time and passion for it. But of course, everyone needs a break, right? And so for me, it's about spending quality time with my friends, my family. I'm heading off to Belgium soon for the Warhammer World Champs, this fun but perhaps slightly nerdy game that I play. Also fitness as well is a big thing. I've been running a lot more, particularly in my later 20s, and making sure that I'm, keeping physically in shape there as well. So I think for anyone, an entrepreneur, a student, an athlete, whatever, this balance is really important to find, and everyone's balance can be a bit calibrated to them. Mine's a bit extreme in certain ways, but it makes it work, and it's sort of stamina that I can run it for a long period of time. But you've got to find that internal balance. So for me, there's just the right ingredient of other things, and that makes me happy in the soul and happy in the heart and happy in purpose, and gives me a lot of good stamina to keep running.
Jamie, I have this one of my colleagues, and he's really motivational, and he starts his lectures with this question: what do you want to achieve in life? And people say, I want to be a doctor, engineer, whatever. And he goes, that is all the incorrect answer. And he goes, the correct answer should be, you should all want to be happy in life. And whatever the happiness comes from. And just where you answered there, you've just said all the things that you're doing are bringing you happiness. And I think a lot of times we don't do that there. We search to be rich or a title or whatever. But if you search for things that make you happy, you're going to be doing things that you really enjoy. A bit like you, a bit like what Tanya does, a bit like what I do. We find happiness in what we do. We will grow with our roles, or we grow with things we do, but it's searching for happiness as opposed to those titles, which is my belief. So and again, when you said, fitness, you said Warhammer, you said those things, you said Crimson as well. Happiness looks very different to different people. So it's really beautiful that you mentioned that there. So thank you for that there. Tanya, any questions for you before you have to disappear again?
No, I think that's been the main question, or the burning question. As I say, I think you're doing a lot of inspiring work, Jamie, and so it's just cool to see, I guess how you find that balance, because I think that's always not the key ingredient that everyone's looking for, but it's cool to get insight from people in these fields doing these things to see how you find that balance, which is cool to see.
Thanks so much.
I guess,
I appreciate that. Great.
I guess link to that, Jamie. You have this passion, which is great, but how do you find running this company that is now growing exponentially? When you first started it, it was a few of you, and now it's taking over the world, which is quite amazing. How do you find time as a young person managing it, and how do you find your staff? Because, as you said, your staff all across the world. And, I remember when I was speaking to one of my managers, they always say to me, the hardest thing you do is getting good staff. How do you find that? And I guess your team.
Crimson today has about 850 full-time staff around the world across 20 countries. And the funny thing is, back in high school, leadership did not come naturally to me. And, I would say it wasn't my strength. I was more an academic guy, maybe played a bit of sports, but leadership certainly wasn't natural. So for me, I would say this has been a constant evolution of imperfection, where I try and evolve and be equipped for the next stage of the adventure. What it takes to grow a startup from, 1 to 10, or 1 to 50, 50 to 150. Each stage has its own perils and challenges. At this point in Crimson's journey, I have to make sure that across our various key divisions, I've got really talented CEOs running the different business units, country managers in place, talented product leaders. There's a culture that's very scalable, that's inspiring, education centric, innovative. We're not getting too bureaucratic or annoying, which chafes our speed of acceleration of innovation. So I would say for me, I have to, of course, set the strategy, hire, great folks, make sure the values are correct, make sure that the performance bar is very high, and stay aware of global trends, local trends that can affect us. All these things are important. When it comes to hiring good people, first of all, momentum helps with that, because people want to be a part of a winning team that's fast moving, agile, and ambitious. The more ambitious the goal, in many ways, I think it's easier to hit an ambitious goal than a mediocre goal, because a mediocre goal is very uninspiring. And so you can't get good people to help you hit that mediocre goal. You may as well aim for the fences. So I've certainly taken that approach, and we've been able to bring in some rock stars. I think about, a recent hire of ours that joined us. He was in Silicon Valley for 10 years, a Kiwi. He actually won a full scholarship to Cambridge and then went to Harvard Business School. He grew up above a dairy in the North Shore. And his family really emphasized the power of education, and he's followed Crimson for a long time. He actually was an early mentor to me. And so he's seen Crimson as really an awesome vehicle to make impact at this stage in his, very experienced Silicon Valley career. So I would say there's that. The other thing is we've got a pretty special reservoir of talent in our alumni community, folks that have been through Crimson, have gone to the schools, in many cases have had quite a life-changing impact, and then we hire them to come back. Folks like, for example, Soraya, who was one of my first students, from my high school. She went to Columbia, then she helped us launch the Middle East. Now she's very senior in Crimson. Many folks like that. So there are a couple of different, pockets of talent that I tap into, and some of the things that I focus on as a leader. I think actually at this current stage, it's almost a more natural fit for my leadership style than perhaps when we had 150 people. But let's see. I always have got to make sure I'm leveling up to stay relevant, and making sure that I'm the best leader for the organization as we go through each new phase.
So many tips in there, Jamie. What I loved there was the fact that you acknowledged the fact that leadership wasn't your strength as you were growing up. And I think that's important, because some people say that you have to be a natural born leader. And I don't believe that you can learn the skill as you go along, but you've got to be open to learning your different skills and your different strategies. So it's really, really beautiful that you've seen that there. Jamie, I guess, as we start wrapping up the podcast, I guess, as you look at Crimson now, what is your vision? I guess I'm not going to say 5 years, because the world changes so dramatically. And in a year's time, where would you like to see Crimson sitting, and from a Jamie perspective as opposed to a global perspective?
So as a Kiwi, the thing that really gets me fired up is fixing this education system, because, education in New Zealand really changed my whole life, the trajectory of my family, and, many of our students. And it's really, frustrating that we have quite a challenge system right now, where a lot of Kiwis are just, being born into a system where they just don't have a fair shot at opportunity. And, if they fall into the wrong crowd, with the wrong school, with the lack of resources, they can be very disengaged, and that can impact them in our country for a long time. So the thing that gets me fired up in the next 12 months is really running super fast at the charter school opportunity, helping as many young Kiwis as we can through that platform, making sure that we start off super strong and very innovative, and we're able to really broaden to help kids that we aren't traditionally serving through Crimson's typical programs, not just necessarily for cost reasons, but because of access or knowledge reasons as well, culture reasons too. And so we're really excited to run at that. I'm really excited to run at that. That's going to be a cool opportunity. That's one thing on my mind. Another thing probably on my mind is just the integration of AI across many facets of Crimson to make our student experience stronger and more effective. That's another fascinating area. And my co-founder, who's got a strong advanced computing background in AI, is really leading the charge on that. But it's really interesting, and it's critical to our next stage of innovation. So there are two things I think that gets me quite fired up, and I'm looking forward to spending more time in New Zealand as well, because of our charter school.
That's, what I love about that. The two things, that AI is coming, it's here. But the first point you raised, I had a conversation yesterday in a taxi with Kale, like I was saying to you, and we're both talking about that exact thing that you said is what is happening in the education system in New Zealand that's failing us. And I speak to that because I went to school in Africa. I went to school in Zimbabwe, and I think about my education in Zimbabwe versus education in New Zealand, and I compare the two, and I was like, a third world country, yet I felt I had a lot of opportunities in education than a first world country, and I'm trying to figure that out, and it just blows my mind that in places like Zimbabwe, people want to learn, they want to go to school, they want to better themselves, but here people don't want to do that. It seems to be, if you want to do that, there's something wrong with you. That going to school, you're a nerd, or what's wrong with you? Why do you want to go to school? It blows my mind. So it's awesome that you have this goal to try and fix that gap there, or that challenge there, which is, if you get that done, that'll be amazing, because I think not just an individual, but the country will benefit from that there. So I'd love to see how that happens in a year's time, because it's truly something that, when I go to schools, I see this every single day, Jamie. I go to schools and I'm like, what? I can't, my mind gets blown every day. I'm like, what is going on here? So I'd love to see how this plays out for you, and for Crimson, and for yourself as well.
Amazing. I agree. Well, I'll report back in a year.
Yeah, we'll get you back, won't we, Jamie? And I guess as we start to round off the podcast, the one question I'd love to ask you is, we call our podcast is called Parcels of Knowledge, and every week we invite our guests to share a piece of knowledge to our guests, with myself and Tane, that you would love for our listeners to take from your experiences, whether it's being Jamie, whether it's being the CEO, whether it's being the founder, whether it's being a student. What would you like to share?
I think one's high school years are some of the highest leverage years in their life. And the current status quo in New Zealand is you take high school easy, and then life kind of begins when you're 18 or 22, and then you start trying. And I've seen this pattern again and again with many of my friends. But if you instead pull that ambition early, and when you're 13, you get fired up, or even younger, and you take education really seriously at that level, it's like a springboard, a catalyst, a snowball that will make everything else in your life far easier, far faster, with far bigger ambitions. So the one thing I'd emphasize is, don't believe the mainstream but fake narrative that high school isn't important. Actually, it's extremely important. It's just, few people are actually treating it that way. So that's one thing I identified early. I took high school very, very seriously, and it's probably one of the single reasons that helped me, burst into entrepreneurship quickly with a lot of velocity. So I really, really recommend, your listeners, even maybe their children, to really take those high school years incredibly seriously. We have kids from all over the world, and we see families in China and Korea and India, but also in places like Australia and South Africa. And in Australia, the culture is very different to New Zealand, I would say, which is sad as a competitive Kiwi, and that people do take high school very seriously for a much greater cross-section of the country. We can too. We should, we must, particularly given our geographic location on the world stage. And so that's a key thing I think people should focus on. Take the high school years seriously, get fired up, treat that academic environment with the intensity you might treat your athletics, and you're going to do great from that.
I love that, because, if your foundation is strong and your foundation is exciting, then everything can grow from there. And a random question, because you spoke of athletics. It's Olympics at the moment. Any sport that you are particularly interested in, or do you watch, or you like me, you just watch whatever sports is on TV because it's the Olympics?
Oh, I do love the Olympics. I was watching it over the weekend. Yeah, I think tennis, of course, is amazing. Athletics in general is pretty addictive. The swimming is really good too. There are a couple that tickle my fancy, but I think tennis is probably my number one. That's the sport I've played the longest in my life.
Oh, beauty. I asked that question because when it's Olympics time, we start watching dressage and fencing, which I never watch ever, but every 4 years I become an expert because, yeah, I'm in the office doing that there. Really, really beautiful. Jamie, any last words for our listeners, or for myself? This has been a really fascinating conversation. We can keep talking forever because there's so much wisdom in there. Oh, I guess one thing I forgot to touch on, your book that you accepted. What made you, you've got this amazing organization, you've got that going there. Where do you find time to write a book as well, which is also another I mean, I read a bit of a synopsis of it, and I've ordered a book as well to read it a bit more. Tell us about what motivated you to write the book.
So during COVID, I was sitting there in lockdown and I was thinking, if I can write a book that summarizes my experience going from New Zealand to the world stage and the admissions process, many Kiwis can read this and it can inspire them to think about this pathway and hopefully get more Kiwis abroad and get more Kiwis thinking big. So that was really my ambition. And I had some wonderful support from some folks in my team from finding, editors and stuff like this perspective. And actually, it was quite a fun journey getting it published. And fortunately, it became a USA national bestseller, which was great. And has actually impacted a lot of young students because they read the book, and it's sort of like the opening spark or cinder that gets them curious. So that was really the idea behind the book. And I'll probably do more in the future, but it was a fantastic journey and certainly a good read if you're a high schooler interested in studying abroad.
I love it because it's low hanging fruit, right? It's a book you can pick up and you can read it. You don't have to spend lots of money. You pick it up, you read it, you get inspired, and then your journey takes off there. So it's just really, really beautiful. So any last words, Jamie, before we wrap up? Anything you'd like to share before we close up?
I think we hit on all the good stuff. I guess I hope we punch our way to the Olympics. Let's see how we go. I'm very excited to see how our Kiwi rowers perform at the Olympics.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That's going to be exciting. Jamie, thank you so much for jumping on. This has been really beautiful for me. Like I said, when we jumped on, I've been following your work for a long time, and it's been interesting because I have heard both sides of it's good and it's bad, the controversy, working in the space with state and public schools, people say good things and bad things. So it's been really fascinating hearing your story. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for taking time out. And I'm sure listeners will pick something up from you. Yeah, for our listeners, thank you for jumping on. Hopefully you picked up something. If you haven't picked up something, jump back and listen again, because Jamie has given us some pretty interesting things to think about in terms of education, but also yourself as a person as you think about what you're doing. Till next time, ka kite, keep safe, keep smiling, and don't forget to put something into your past knowledge. Till then, bye everybody.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.